I'll start off introducing myself and a little bit about this series that we're doing, and then introduce our guest today, Kjerstin Thomas. My name is Joshua Arvidson. I'm the Chief Clinical Officer and Chief Operating Officer at Alaska Behavioral Health. Worked in the behavioral health field for almost 30 years and been a licensed clinician for 20, an LCSW and LPC supervisor. And a lot of my background is in pediatric mental health, and we're the largest pediatric mental health provider in the state. And so super excited about the topic today. One of the most common concerns and areas of focus for children who are facing mental health challenges is anxiety or challenges in school. And literally last night finished the summer semester of teaching the child clinical psychology course at UAA, and about half of what we talk about is kids in schools. And school is the occupation of childhood and sets them up for so many things that are important in development and their lifelong and learning and development. So super excited about the topic today. So I'm going to be interviewing Kjerstin Thomas. Kjerstin has been a kindergarten teacher for 10 years, 22 years in the Anchor School District. Is that right, Kjerstin?
It is.
All right. And my mom was a kindergarten teacher for 20 years. So I love kindergarten teachers. So excited to have you here today and talking about your perspective as a teacher, helping kids do well at school and be comfortable and get off to a good start. And then this time of year, we're getting ready for school to start up again. I can tell from your background, you're out of school right now.
I am here. We haven't officially started yet, but we have kind of one setup day, so it never happens in that one day. So it's August, it's raining, so I'm here.
You're ready. You're ready. Okay, well, good. So I'm excited about today's conversation. We have some folks who are healthcare providers log into these, clinicians, parents, kind of a wide range. And I'm always thankful of conversations we can have kind of across healthcare and education and other settings to help kids and help families do well in these really important environments. And school along with the home environment is where it's at for kids. So super excited about today's conversation. So um, maybe can we start off, Sherston, talking just as an educator, and particularly as an educator working in kindergarten and early elementary age education. One of the things that I hear and work with parents and families a lot is kids having some anxiety about school. And and then, one of the things I see as a therapist is whenever you're away from something for a while, if you have any anxiety about that thing, it can build and build and build. And so we see a lot of this in the fall where kids are kind of anxious about going back to school, or families are a little bit anxious. And what, as a teacher, on the other end of this and helping kids get back into the groove of being in school for kindergartners, it's a different kind of maybe environment a little bit than they were in the past. What are the things that you wish parents knew about how to help kids do well as they start school again in the fall?
Yeah, so it's a big deal for kids, but it's also such a big deal for parents and, culturally, like it's such a milestone to start kindergarten. So I think there are nerves on both ends. And, we know about kids is they sense our anxieties too. So I think those things are just inseparable. But that being said, there's a reason because it's a big transition coming from, more of a care environment into a bigger setting. So I think that first, like the adults' mindfulness and preparation for that meeting the teacher is an important one because I have a, different start than when I taught older grades where maybe they're familiar with the teacher from seeing them around, or they're familiar with school and what school is. And this is so abstract for most 5-year-olds. It's a really abstract of what this going to kindergarten experience is. So oftentimes in the very first introduction to the teacher, the parent is nervous, the child is nervous, and we often don't see typical behavior for that child because there's just so much pressure. We might see some sort of silliness or such quietness, and it's okay. Like the teacher knows that. The teacher knows this is not the full picture of your child. And so I think kind of taking the pressure off that very first meeting is a great idea. However, you can get yourself to do that as a parent. And I remember I've been a parent of a kindergartner 2 times, and it's a lot. But just kind of modeling calm, I think, can be really helpful. And then getting ready after meeting a new teacher, and then for that first day, the school district actually has some supports that help. For example, every kindergartner in ASD has a chance to sit down one-on-one with their teacher, and the family is involved in it. It's called a family meeting. It varies how long it is, but ours are 30 minutes and it's one-on-one time. So that's really where we get a chance to see what your child's personality is like and learn a little bit about your family. Not so much that first meeting. We do our first meeting at a back to school picnic, and it's just like an awkward, busy, overstimulating environment for kids. So the family meeting is really first chance to make a connection. And then the school district also several years ago added in kind of a practice kindergarten day, and it's just a short one. So you might find out, you might not find out yet, but about 1 or 2 days where your child can go maybe for 2 hours so that the first day isn't so epically long. And so it's inconvenient for parents working, because it's not full day, but I think that's really beneficial to try to make that work, if at all possible, to go to the Ready for Kindergarten days. And those always happen after grades 1st through 6 have already started. There's a whole week that kindergarten is delayed start, and you'll get a one-on-one time with your teacher and then those practice times. So I think the bottom line is, parents have a lot of feelings too about the separation, about how their child's behavior will be. But the more you can do to mentally prepare yourself to be mindful of that anxiety, it will really help your child. And then if you do hear concerns, I don't want to go to school, I don't know what it's going to be like. A lot of kids say, I don't have any friends. They just don't know the facts. Like, oh, everyone is new. Everyone is a new kid. We're all new. That is helpful. And I think just really communicating, I think it's going to be great. Like positive talk about school. Absolutely, we want to acknowledge their anxiety, but I think talking about how it's going to be kind of a new adventure can really be helpful for kids to hear.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Part of what's I love about these kinds of conversations is there's like these ideas we have in developmental psychology, for example, and your experience as a teacher, and there's like this overlap. So like when you talk about parents communicating, kind of quiet confidence and optimism about how it's going to go back to school. We talk about this idea in psychology all the time and clinical practice of co-regulation, that your infant really cues off of, they interpret the world through your response, right? If you think like early in child development, like the child is looking to the parent like, is this a scary thing or is this an okay thing? I get to see this all the time. I have a 140-pound fluffy Newfoundland. And he's a little bit wild at home, but like he's actually trained like as a therapy dog outside the environment. And I take him to a baseball game and I can kind of predict how a child is going to interpret this giant dog the size of a black bear by how the parents respond. And the parents are like, oh look, let's ask to pet him. And I mean, the parent lends the child their curiosity and optimism and confidence, and those kids are like, oh, I want to check this dog out. And the parents who are like, oh my goodness. the children pick up on that. And so it's interesting you're saying like that's critical in helping kids, get off to a good start in school. They're interpreting this through their parents' response. And we talk about that as co-regulation, or there's a couple different concepts for it, but it's a really critical idea in child development, particularly in the child-parent relationship. So interesting that you're when you and there's another concept you talk about there too, which is like validating the child's experiences and their anxiety, but not magnifying those concerns, right? So you acknowledge them, like, oh yeah, this is a big change, but it's going to be okay. It's going to go, it's going to be all right. And in mirroring, which is a kind of interesting concept in child development, we talk about match and lift. So like if your child is crying, then you're like, oh, it's going to be okay, so you're matching them. But like you getting despair and bawling with your child who's upset isn't going to help them, right? You got to lift them up. So acknowledge, oh, your tummy hurts or whatever, and then lift them up. It's going to be okay. And it sounds like that's a key strategy you're identifying for parents when it comes to school and anxiety about school starting. Um, is there, when we think about other pieces of where kids can kind of get stuck with school. Um, what about when kids, maybe have made it through that first initial start, and they're back in the school environment, and they're coming home and talking about conflict with their peers, or difficulty with interactions with other students. What are some of the things that you would like parents to be thinking about in helping kids navigate those concerns?
Yeah, I guess the starting point is it's good to keep in mind that when they're sharing with you because they love you, but also processing and thinking through and working out any issues that come up. I remember when my first was in kindergarten, it was like she would just come home and often just report to me who did what that was wrong. That's what I heard a lot of the times instead of like her own experience. And it's just, she was processing the rules and how that fit and everyone's piece and the new community. And it's really normal. I think that uh, it takes a while to adjust, no matter, not just kindergarten. It really takes that first quarter, the whole first quarter until October for a class to really settle in, just on average, I guess. And so it will take time, and you will hear concerns a lot in the beginning of the year, or maybe you will not, but you will sense them. And for some kids, that will mean verbally telling you everything that went unexpected or wrong about the day or conflict. And for other kids, that might come out in behavior, tiredness. Like it is so much cognitive load to get used to a new teacher. This is all day, every day. It's like switching a new job. It's exhausting. And so I think knowing just that it's normal for your child to like act out at home, especially if they've been keeping it cool all day. If there aren't behavior issues with your child going on at school, you know, that sometimes is really when you see it at home because they're just done. Their patience um and just energy is kind of zapped. So that's really typical for me to hear that, there's an increase in either crying or just difficult behavior in the first quarter of school, and just like giving it time, I think is helpful. Later in the year, um, I think no matter the age, particularly kindergarten, you know, conflict and conflict resolution is a huge part of our social emotional curriculum. Beginning of the year, we kind of focus on following rules, building a community. And then as kids get comfortable, conflict will come up inevitably. And conflict management is kind of a second half of the year focus. And particularly with 5 and 6 year olds, they're kind of moving from a period of time when they're 3 and 4, where they're very self-focused. When we have 3 year olds, they're parallel playing and then they start playing together. And then their awareness of each other increases. And by between 5 and 6, they really start to focus more on their peers, no matter how social or extroverted or introverted the child is. And so with that, we see, that friendship becomes more important, and this is going to continue until they're teenagers, and that they engage more, and with that comes conflict. So when we get to that time of year, it's really typical for me to get emails with, parent concerns of this child did this to my child, and parents trying to figure out what's a small problem and what's a big problem. And those are exactly that's the language we use at school. Small problems are things that we expect and we support, but we want kids to try to work out on their own. And we explicitly teach strategies in Anchorage School District, for example, taking turns talking and sharing, walking away, ignoring a person, all of those things to try when you have conflict. And big problems are when you need an adult to intervene. Now, small problems sometimes are big problems at this age and even older ages because kids don't always have the skills that they need to work it out. But I think that's a hard part of parenting. And when you are not there and you're trying to sort out, is this a big or a small problem? But I guess one thing I would say is like conflict, we tend to think of as a negative, but as a teacher, I try to see it kind of as a positive because with conflict, they are gaining skills. They are practicing working things out. And when we intervene always, it really robs them of their chance to be independent and work things out. That's hard with siblings too. A parent intervenes because it's getting out of hand, and we want to give kids the message that they can work out small problems, and when they have big problems, they need to go to an adult. That's so important in and out of school. So I guess when you hear concerns about conflict, I think taking a breath, of listening, trying to sort out, like, does this sound like something that they can work out? Talking about ways you can work it out, and empowering them to try to manage conflict is something really powerful to do as a parent. And then, of course, reaching out to teachers when you think that's not working, they're trying, or you have concerns.
Can you talk a little bit about that? And part of what I hear you saying is that um, this ability to tolerate frustration and kind of work through challenging interpersonal interactions with their peers is it sounds like I mean you're kind of identifying that as like a key developmental task of a kindergartner, right? Is working out small problems, as you call them, with peers without needing adult constant intervention, right? And interjection. And, when you were talking about, the transition from being 3 to a kindergartner, I always picture, the 3-year-old who covers their own eyes and says, "You can't see me," which is the perfect reminder of like they are experiencing the world through their own perspective, not yours. And parallel play and all that. And then they're all of a sudden in this social environment where they got to negotiate sharing with 20 plus other kids. And can you talk a little bit more about how you try to decide whether it's a big problem that needs adults to kind of jump in, and how you sort out what's a small problem where you can it's really best to continue to let kids kind of sort it out themselves and negotiate it themselves. Um, are there some guidelines or tips you have for kind of sorting that out?
Well, at school, when we introduce big versus small problem, it's like a group family kind of meeting. And so we talk through real scenarios, and it's really interesting as a teacher to see what they perceive as a big or small problem. And so we define small problems as things that you can work out on your own or try to work out on your own. And big problems should go straight to an adult. And then we go further to define, safety issues. Those are big problems. Where you are going to get injured, those are big. So we kind of have some definitions. And then the next lesson is this a big or a small problem? And we use hand motions and practice lots of things. And
Mhm.
then they themselves will discuss, do you think this is a big or a small problem? And I guess it kind of comes down to, yeah, are you safe? A lot of it is safety guided. And so it's kind of I think for some kids, it's a little mind blowing that they can solve small problems, and it's an empowering thing because they haven't been in this position before.
Mhm.
And so then the next part is, and this is not just a kindergarten thing, this is a curriculum, social emotional learning thing. Um, the one we use is called Kelso's Choices. Um, and then we teach explicitly what are the ways that we can solve small problems, which I named a few, by ignoring or walking away or sharing and take turns. So all of those strategies. And then as a group, we practice what strategy would you use in this situation? And, often you can use two or three strategies. And not all kids, even if they have siblings, are taught conflict management at home. So it's often a pretty new skill um, for kids. And again, they're not so much ready for it when they're 5, but coming toward 6. But many kids need to learn this still at 8 or 9 or 10 or beyond.
I'm thinking as you're talking through this, there's like this underlying developmental task of building capacity for like emotional regulation, right? Just
Mhm.
like making it through challenging experiences, potentially frustrations, things that might make us sad or anxious, or these other things. And um, I'm hearing this like idea of, adults kind of provide some guardrails and an environment and some structure for that to happen, but also we need to let it happen. And like constantly intervening and jumping in the middle of every interaction. Actually, it sounds like your experiences that actually can get in the way of kids developing some of these skills. So um can you talk through? So we talked a little bit about like peer conflict or other thing, but what are other areas where kids are really developing that capacity to kind of, get through it? And this too shall pass, in terms of their emotional experiences in a school day.
Yeah, and I would say this is another one that is not limited to kindergarten. So,
Hmm.
I mean, people often say, like, how can I get my child ready for school? And parents are often focused on, can they write their name? Can they read their name? Do they know the letters and numbers? But like really in the end, can you get along with others is so up here, and staying cool and calm and self-regulated. Like those are really my biggest wishes for kids by the end of kindergarten. Um, because that readiness to learn is really difficult when you cannot do those things and your day is filled with conflict or in emotional meltdowns. So the other thing that we spend a lot of time on, and it's really not just kindergarten, is emotional regulation and self, tools for oneself. And so we introduced as a whole group breathing, breathing tools. We have different kinds of breathing that are all part of conscious discipline, which is a curriculum as well. And these are things that adults are working on as well. And so modeling the use of breathing either with anxiety or anger, talking about when we can use calm down strategies. Or one that I see the most is when we are too excited, because there's so much excitement and that comes out sometimes in, behavior. And so calm down strategies is a big one. In my school, there is a take a break spot identified, and we teach how to use that. And it is a one-person place. Like, what can we do to calm down? Whether that is from overexcitement or frustration or anger or anxiety or emotion, or sadness, because all of those things come up, but the strategies are pretty similar, no matter what you're feeling. And so acknowledging and learning, identifying feelings is something that actually kids come in with pretty great skills now. It seems like preschools have done a great job with identifying feelings. Even we have lots of kids where, their disability makes that difficult, and practice matters. And so I often have, pretty high success rate on identifying feelings from a face or a picture of a face. But regulating the feelings is a much harder one, and one that, takes a lot of individual practice. So most kids will use this quiet place at some point, but some kids need it more than others, and they need a small group or individual lesson in how can I calm down? I can take some deep breaths. I can, the different choices for calming down, looking at a book. We have different little tools and manipulatives in this corner. So yeah, that one doesn't go away either, even with getting older.
Yeah, it's so interesting thinking about that. That hearing your perspective, like you said, it's not just in kindergarten, but especially at this early age. It's maybe a decade ago, I started, reading about, there's different ways you can measure like success in a school experience, right, on a student's lifespan. But if you look at graduation, it's just one good proxy for like things going reasonably well. And data going back and saying, well, if you look at the ability, enjoyment of reading and these other things in third grade, that's predictive of maybe graduation rates. But then when you roll that back farther to earlier experiences, you start to see data for these social emotional competencies, right? So like knowing your ABCs when you go, parents get really, I hear a lot of parents in my office, well, they're not ready for school because they can't, tie their shoes or whatever. And I'm like, if they're excited about going to school and they like it there, all this will all work out. That's the biggest predictor of them starting, them being in the environment, feeling excited about it, successful about it, seeing maybe not too excited, right? So that they're just buzzing and unable to engage, right? And that kids being excited about school, having some confidence, feeling connected to their teacher and their peers, that's like what launches the ship. And maybe that's more key. That's what we think about, in like the developmental literature. It's really interesting to hear your perspective as a teacher, kind of coming to this similar place of like, let's have kids feel good about school and their ability to navigate this environment, and that's like the platform of the launching kind of point. I've always wondered though, why is that? Like what is it about that? Like the foundation is sounds like is this social emotional skills and competence and experiences, and then all the academic things kind of fall, not that they're easy, but that's like the platform. So if you're telling a parent like trying to memorize these things or learn all these basic, academic things is probably not the best way to get ready for kindergarten. It's something else.
Mhm.
And why is that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because really that has changed, When I went to
Mm,
kindergarten, it truly was blocks, puzzles. There was a little bit of alphabet, but we were not reading books like we are at the
mhm,
kindergarten,
mhm,
end of
mhm,
kindergarten. So things have changed over, you know, that many years of when I was 5. But, most of our parents aren't that old. So it has become more academic. What you hear at conferences after kindergarten is often focused on academic, but um, yeah, I don't know. I think people often do come in and worry that their child doesn't know all of the letters and the numbers. Um, and again, from my perspective, like actually letter sounds are more important than letter names,
mhm,
So
mhm,
we are not expecting that and as far as skills go, really being able to go to the bathroom independently and zip your coat
mhm.
is still more important, some of those independence.
Especially
um
here in Alaska, right?
yes, put on your mittens
Yeah.
without
Snow
parent.
pants before the boots.
Yes.
Yeah. Hmm. So it's changed, it sounds like, in your experience. And um, what what are your ideas about how that social emotional competencies or foundation sets kids up? Like, um, why do you think that's more the foundation than coming, with knowing your letters or something else? Like, what is it doing for kids?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, in a perfect world, we would have universal pre-K and we would get to spend a few years on
Mhm.
some of those soft skills, 3, 4. Um, and then kids would be ready to learn academically, but we don't have that. I mean, I every year have kids who have never been to any pre-K setting, or they've been in daycare, but it's not academic. We have just a
Mm,
big range of skills coming in. Um, and and that's okay. That's okay. That is what we expect. We're not like measuring kids up with a ruler at the beginning of how, high they are. It's just that's not what a teacher is primarily looking for. Like all of the good teachers I know, that is not the focus. It's like we're totally focused in the beginning of a year on getting to know the child and building a classroom community. So it's like, even though the academics have shifted and there is a lot more pressure on kids, we have
mm,
timed assessments in kindergarten, like that didn't exist even over 10 years ago. Um, and not all kids are ready for that, honestly. They sometimes know lots of letters or numbers, but they don't do well on a timed assessment. But that's, not my decision to make. So things have gotten more academic, but the other thing that's changed, since I was in kindergarten is we do explicitly teach social emotional learning skills. And so that, I don't know, I think that supports the other,
mm,
when we look at the brain's readiness to learn, um, kids who feel safe and feel connected, will have an easier time learning. And even if home life, that's not there, like the school can provide that safe and connected place, even if that's not at home. And that will really help readiness to learn. So, um, yeah, it's a lot. The academic skills we're asking for kindergarten and first grade, like when I started my career 20 years ago, really kindergarten is the new first grade, I would say. It has shifted that much. Um,
Mhm.
but kids, um, are sponges, and I think many of them are ready to go. And, I'm a Montessori teacher, so the philosophy is that when they're from 3 to 6, they're absorbent with language, um, and this is a perfect time to learn many things. Um, but that for some kids, that's really difficult when they are not not at the place yet. And that's when a good teacher, knows how to differentiate and kind of wait and watch if there is
Mhm.
difficulty.
So I'm gonna ask a selfish question. I'm gonna ask your advice to me. So I'm a therapist, and
Mhm.
you probably can tell I've seen some kids over the years and families, and I think a lot in the neurosequential model, which is just lines up with what you're saying. Like you got to turn the fire alarm off if you're going to learn how to play checkers. Like you got to emotionally regulate. That's how the brain's organized. Um, and if I was working with a family and had some parents who wanted to support their child in developing some of these skills that you're saying are really the foundation for them doing well in school. Um, you mentioned some things that you work on in school environments, like there's discussion about little problems and big problems, and so it sounds like there's some negotiation, there's some perspective taking. You're probably doing some like breathing or other kind of exercises for calming kids' bodies down when they're too high and bringing them up when they're sad or disengaged. What are things that we could work on in the home as parents, or I could work with families on that would translate well into the school environment and really align with the things that you're working on? And I realize it's different. Parents may be working with a couple kids in a sibling group, and you're working with 20 plus kids at a time. So it's a different thing, but some of those skills might translate. So, what are things we should be doing outside the classroom to support students being successful in the classroom?
Yeah, I think I would put aside like the conflict management thing. That's hard to practice at home because it's going to be
Yeah.
different. Siblings,
Yeah.
siblings, and classmates are very different dynamics.
Mhm,
So I think
mhm,
set that one aside for, later on in school. I think number one, and this is really like our number one lesson, is listening skills. So we call it whole body listening, and what does that look like? What does it look like to be listening to either a teacher or a peer? And this goes with friendship too, introducing yourself. So kids actually may need direct instruction with when we are listening, we stop what we're doing and we look at the person who is talking. Now,
mhm,
can we listen without doing that? Yes. But whole body ideal listening, we're looking at the person who is talking, we're trying to calm ourselves, we're listening with our ears and with our eyes, um, and we're not interrupting. So that's something you could actually practice with your student, older students included. You know, I would say over the years, listening has not gotten better. And so kids need that reminder. And, we need to model it because, frankly, like it's there's so many distractions in 2026 that um, listening as a skill, I think, is something, a concept to introduce to your child. And, I have teens, and that's also something I can work on with them is, you know, are you listening? Can you show me that you are listening? Um, trickier. So that would be one. Um, and then next, I think that piece about, you called it co-regulation. So we do that as a group. And then I definitely have the opportunity to do it with individuals. In kindergarten, I have a paraprofessional in the room for half of the day. And often some of that person's role is helping kids co-regulate. Like the emotions are high in the beginning of the year, kids get tired, they get overwhelmed. Um, but I think as a parent, um, just kind of keeping in mind that at home, that looks like maybe you with your child, helping them to regulate their emotions. And sometimes that means giving them space. And sometimes it really needs, they physically need you there, helping them calm down. It depends on the kid. But also keeping in mind just like the ratio, that is not going to be an option always at school, that they have an adult to help them um, calm down and co-regulate. And so I think just kind of working toward independence with that, you know, they know it's a different setting too. So I think, even if you have a child who struggles with um, high emotions and needs you to help them regulate, that doesn't mean they will need that same level of support at school. It might be fine. Um, because home and school behavior is so different. A lot of the things that you may struggle with your child could totally vanish at school. That happens very regularly.
Mm. So many. Oh, I wish we had more time because I have so many follow-up questions to that. Um, there's this really interesting. Um, so one of the most evidence-supported therapies that we use is something called parent-child interaction therapy, and I certainly can't go into all of what PCIT is, but the core of it is exactly what you're talking about. But the parent doing whole body listening and noticing and full attention to their child and just doing that for 10 minutes. It's incredible how hard, because we got all these distractions and we're adults, so we multitask, and so we're listening to one and not the other, or we're looking at our phone, and you're just like, no, we're just going to, like, with our whole body, listen to and reflect and narrate, like, what the child is doing, and you're supporting the parent and doing that. And it's like magic. It just like changes child behavior like so quick. And it's so interesting because when I was first watching, I was like, oh, the parent is really looking like a really good early educator in their skills. Like, I mean, it's like, oh, this is when I see it, when I can spot someone across the room and say they're a preschool teacher because of how like habitual it is. Like you really, and you're doing that with a lot of students, and so it's challenging, but it's so interesting. It's like magic in terms of shaping children's behavior. And I was going back to what you were talking about earlier, like kids are sponges. And part of the theme I hear is like they're looking to us as grown-ups and they're modeling behavior off of us all the time. And so it just keeps coming back to this idea that maybe one of the most important pieces of advice you have for us who are working with children outside of school settings is really the kind of model the behavior and the regulation and the skills that we want our child or student to be taking with them into the school environment. And
Mm.
even though the school environment and the home environment may be so different, it sounds like some of those skills are so parallel in terms of so so um, so can you so you're a developmental expert because you work with kindergartners all day, and so many of them. And a parent has maybe three kids, and so they get to see three kindergartners, in that age range. So what is it, what, when we're interacting with children in this age range, in a home environment or other settings and trying to help them, you know, be successful in school, what is it that we should be doing in the ways that we interact with children in this age range, in terms of our behavior, our tone, our just the things that we're doing and modeling for them?
Well, I think we talked about, modeling, yeah, the behavior that we want to see. So, I mean, it's kind of, you know, basic. Like, I think it's good for kids to see their parents upset and then calm down. I mean, I think
Mhm.
avoiding that is not giving them the chance to see that we are humans just like they are, and we experience the same struggles, or even little classroom rules like that we are not that in the classroom that we should be next to someone if we want to talk to them, instead of if they're across the room we need to walk over to them. But like that's a really hard one for me because I'm sort of in charge here. So I let them know, like, that's something I'm working on too. We are all working on something, and I'm working on walking to somebody and being next to them if I want to say something, you know? So I think being honest about the things we're all working on is a helpful one. And really just like humanizes us as adults, that we're working on things just like they are. Um, Yeah, I don't know. I think I feel like I said a lot of things that have to do with what else we could um model. So I have a teacher that I used to work with that at the beginning of the year, you know, they kind of had an area for to calm down, and she would actually, I guess maybe it was a little fictionalized, like get upset and physically go to this place to show like that this is for everyone, that it's not
Oh yeah.
just children that get angry and need need regulation. So I've never done that, but it's a good idea.
You may be familiar with there's the kind of father of object relations theory, which is an interesting developmental theory. Was a British pediatrician named Winnicott. And one of the things Winnicott talked about was good enough parenting. And the concept behind good enough parenting was, he said, you don't want to be perfect because
Mm.
perfect doesn't teach anyone anything, right? And so like you said, if you were perfectly responsive to your infant, like every time they cried, met their need immediately, that's actually not good. It's not. And he was writing when a lot of these like parenting books were coming out and parents were getting really putting a lot of pressure on themselves. And he's like, there's good enough parenting. In fact, good enough is better than perfect because perfect doesn't teach anyone anything. And that
Yeah,
humanizing, like, whew, let's take the pressure off, do our best. That's actually what kids need to see.
and actually that kind of different topic, but I want to mention is setting your child up for success like 100% of the time is like kind of setting them up for failure. Like
Mm,
the kids who cannot deal when they came to school, they've got their snow pants and their boots, but like one mitten is gone and they need to borrow a mitten, but that is so big of a deal because they have never experienced just having to deal like, okay, I'm going to
mhm,
borrow a mitten. It's someone else's mitten. It might be another color, but it is okay. Like super important that you are self-aware and reflecting like, am I providing my child with chances to just kind of like figure out? Because if we are always fixing those kinds of scenarios, that itself is going to be an issue. Same with lunch, a lot of kids are worried about having school lunch. They always bring their lunch or they just like their lunch. But like, if one day the lunch is not there, can your child get through that? Those are the kinds of things to kind of like think through. And you might be surprised. The answer is no, they could not get through that. And so that is an area to work on of like just little scenarios where they have to figure out, you know, what to do and they can be able to. And for some kids, this is a non-issue. They are laid back and they go with things. Um, Especially like, kids from really big families tend to be real good at that, just dealing and figuring it out. But we don't have a lot of huge families anymore. And so I think parents trying to help sometimes ends up kind of hurting. And we call it frustration tolerance too, like that can you tolerate a little bit of frustration, whether that is not having the things that you need or not having something just so the way you like it, um, or just when things get difficult, maybe for the first time with learning. All of those are kind of frustration tolerance. I was told that the best thing to do for a child that struggles in that area, because things typically are easy or a parent is kind of making things easy, is playing an instrument, is a good frustration tolerance activity, because it is all new and you will make mistakes. So yeah, I mean, parents kind of are on different sides of that, everybody's personality. That's a kind of a parent personality thing too, I think. So, just giving your child the opportunity to make mistakes.
Nothing taught me more about dealing with failure than trying to play the violin when I was a child. I was I had some natural abilities in some areas and would was reading and all these things, but the violin, oh my goodness, it taught me a lot about, we all have things we're not good at. And I'm thankful for that. I never became a great violin player, but when my day doesn't go perfect, I'm like, yeah, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. So well, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. It's a busy time of year for you, getting ready for school. And again, I want to thank you for not just sharing your time with us today, but being a teacher in the school district I grew up in, and that my brothers grew up in, and my mom taught in for 20 plus years. And really, really thankful for you taking the time to share your experiences with us and give us some tips on helping kids do well in the business of childhood. And school is such a big part of it. So
No problem. I love it, and it is a lot, but one of the more rewarding careers one could choose.
oh yeah, yeah, I can hear all the thinking you do all the time and reflecting on this super important part of children's lives.